an Apex Lab podcast. Hey there, welcome to the Level Up Engineering Podcast, where we speak to the most experienced technology leaders from around the world. So stay with us to learn actionable management insights to take your engineering team to the next level. This show is powered by Apex Lab, a team of experts in end-to-end digital product development. ApexLab.io.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen and children and everyone who is in tune for another episode of the Level Up Engineering Podcast. I am Karolina Tóth and I talk with very accomplished technology leaders every other week. Today, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Broza. He is a value delivery and agile leadership expert. And we are going to talk about something that I think will give us a lot of value. But before we get into today's topic, please allow me to welcome Broza in the studio. Welcome.
Thank you. It is great to be here.
We are very glad that you're here with us. Before we start with the topic, I would love for you to introduce yourself a little bit for the listeners. Tell us about where you are in life and what you like to do with your time, just to get to know you a little better.
Okay. Broza, I live in Toronto, Canada. Best city I could live in. I have been in the software industry for over 30 years. And what I've been doing for the past 20 or so is to help leaders upgrade their organization's way of working, usually with a focus on Agile. It used to be helping people get started. My Agile is not denominational. I'm not in one camp or the other. It's all about the choice making and working in a way that makes sense for the organization, for what they want to achieve. Nowadays, the spectrum is wider because every company is in a different space right now. And the focus remains, though, on, people want to work better and deliver better results. That's where I come in. To get to know me more personally, my biggest hobby is to solve puzzles. I love word puzzles, language-based puzzles, math puzzles, jigsaw puzzles too, though they are just for relaxing. And that's a good deal of how I spend my spare time with. And fortunately, my wife loves this as well. So we solve together all the time. We even go to conventions.
Well, thank you. Thank you for giving us a little bit of insight into who you are. And with that said, let's jump into today's topic because I think it's very interesting and I love, as far as I've known, what your take on it is. We are arguably at the best state of software development and product development in the history of the human species.
Yeah.
But product development still isn't great yet. We can't say it's perfect. And let's see what are some of the common challenges that you see in product development to begin with.
Okay. Look, I would agree with your statement that we are at the most evolved state. And when it comes to software development, one thing that I think characterizes it is that development has gotten faster, a lot faster. Like I said, I was in the industry 30 years. Nothing moved this fast 30 years ago. But the products are not necessarily getting better. And that's one thing I think. I mean, of course, you have many successful companies, but you also have many other companies that do genuinely want to build successful products, but that's not how things actually come out. Right? So in terms of solving user problems, in terms of delivering value, I don't think this has caught up to the new pace of development. Now let's look at the workers. So my philosophy is very, people first. So I pay attention most to the people, not the same level of attention to the process and the product. They come second. I think that workers are actually no more engaged than they used to be, which was low. And we had the pandemic, and now we have this whole mix-up of, offices, remote work, hybrid, all of that stuff. And my impression is that overall engagement of employees in the software development lifecycle is not particularly better. So that's another challenge. Here's another one. how do you work so that you're successful? Again, that's the focus of my work. So companies adopt some way of working, and they kind of seem to stop there. I mean, teams might have some retrospectives, and every now and then there is a change, and every now and then there is maybe a reorg, or maybe somebody needs a transformation, right? But I believe that few companies are actively, consistently trying to improve their work across the lifecycle. Every few years, we have something new come along. So we had Scrum, we had Kanban, we have OKRs, we have a bunch of stuff. I mean, DevOps, continuous delivery, you name it. So people take that, they take it partially. They don't necessarily apply it 100% usefully. And of course, because we work in a system, you make one change, you create other effects, some of which you don't actually want to have. And the change effort often seems to kind of stall at that point. So that's another challenge that I see nowadays. And one more, which is very much a matter of the last, I'm going to say, year. There has been so much talk, at least in 2023, about how Agile is bad, Agile is dead, there's disenchantment with Agile, and so on. It usually comes from the bigger companies. The companies that went at it with like a big transformation or tried to standardize it. And that's fine. If Agile is wrong for them, fine. If it's wrong for them for the wrong reasons, I have an issue with that, but fine. What concerns me though, is that those companies say, well, we're not going to use Agile. We're going to fire the Scrum Masters. We're going to let go the coaches. But then what do they do instead? What other model for work do they have? And the answer I see is there isn't an obvious model. They carry out a collection of practices that seems to kind of make sense, or maybe people have used before, or they are best practices, or they're popular, but there is no coherent strategy for development. Not business strategy, not product strategy, but strategy for developing successful products. And that worries me because you need to have a coherent one, and hopefully it's suitable, in order to be more successful.
So we are going to spend the next however much time giving them a working model that can be used in lieu of Agile software development. Is that right?
Well, not necessarily Agile. Look, I fully respect that for a lot of companies, Agile as described, by which I mean consistent with the spirit of the manifesto, not consistent with somebody's flavor of Scrum or some such, but the choice making, the Agile choice making. I fully respect that is not suitable for everybody, and it doesn't need to be. Waterfall was not right for everybody. Lean is not right for everybody. So is Agile, and that's okay. What I want to share with our listeners is a model for thinking about improving your operating model, whatever it happens to be. If it happens to be Agile, fine, instantiate it with Agile. If it happens to be more Lean, fine, instantiate it with Lean.
What would you advise to leaders? How should they start with looking through their software development as it is right now?
Okay. So first off, we're talking to every leader who is part of what I refer to as the value delivery system, which means not just engineering, not just product, not just design, not just delivery. So the first bit of the advice is for these leaders to get this mental picture of what their value delivery system is, what it includes, and what it does. Now, what it does is usually the easy bit, right? It produces product X or something or a service or a solution. But who's in it? And this is where I find that a lot of leaders kind of underspecify. And so the analogy I like to give is, imagine that your product is a movie, right? And you go to the end of the movie and there's the list of credits. And the list of credits is like really long, right? It's everybody who contributed something to the creation of the thing, right? So it's not just the obvious, actors, producer, director, screenwriter, which in your case might be product and engineering, but it's, of course, designers. It's the project manager, program manager. It's the content writers. Of course, it's the architects. It's the people who deploy the thing and the people who fix it when it breaks down. So who's in it? That includes managers, several layers up. In many product companies, for instance, that goes all the way up to VP or CTO, CIO, depending on how much they affect the decision-making that happens in the system. The other aspect of the system is how does it work? What I call the way of working. So the way of working has two parts. One is the visible practices, like we meet every day for 15 minutes and we talk about progress, or we have this backlog in Jira and we try to keep it not too long, something like that. But the other element of the way of working, and that's actually the impactful one, is what I've been referring to as the mindset, which is effectively the choices that you make. For instance, we don't make promises 12 months out. That's part of your mindset. It's a choice that you're making consistently. You implement it in practices. And what you say to who and when and how. Another choice is we collaborate whenever possible. Okay, so that's another one. So the first thing you need to do is understand that you have this system and work takes place in it in non-obvious ways. Mm-hmm. And that's the other bit. Even when leaders are aware of their value delivery systems, sometimes they take a very linear view of it. For instance, people who use the concept of value stream sometimes do that because the concept of value stream kind of implies that things kind of flow from left to right. They go through a bunch of groups. But the way things actually work in real life is that any choice made in one part of the flow has ramifications elsewhere in the flow. So a choice that the developer makes might affect the product more than the developer intended. And of course, a choice that a designer makes has impact everywhere else. How we deliver the product affects how we fix it. It's the whole world, right? And that's one reason I like to even think of it as a system. And so the next part of the advice is if you want to make improvements, you need to make them systemically, not in an isolated fashion, such as I'm in engineering, so we're going to engineer better. We're going to write better unit tests, and we're going to refactor our code more, and we're going to really amp up the code reviews. And all of these, they're not bad ideas, but they will have impact throughout the system. So when you're contemplating them, work with your peers to understand what the potential impacts could be, many of which should be positive, but some could actually be negative. So make improvements systemically and holistically. Now, the other piece of advice is that change really starts with people. It doesn't start with process. So it's not just about we do practice X, now let's go to X prime or to Y, or just generally improve how we carry out something. It's like, okay, in the Agile space, I still see posts on how you run your daily stand-up better. And seriously, it's been 25 years, right? So it's not, right? So it's not about the daily stand-up. It's about what happens there. And what happens there is totally a result of what people in the meeting do. And what they do is in turn a response to the environment. So for instance, if the environment is one of, we do predictability here, we need to know what we're getting, then the stand-up will have the vibe of a status report. And you have to show that you're busy. And you can't just say, hey, I was stuck on something. And it's not about, well, did you take 60 seconds to speak, or did you take 45, or did you go on and on? It's not about that. Did you say something useful so that we can move on? So everything here is kind of tied together. But it all boils down to how people behave, and people will behave based on personality, their own mindset, the effects of the influences of the environment, the compensation, the incentives, the competition, who's on my team. Are we asked to do something that I like, or is it something that I hate, or is it boring, or is it exciting, or is it potentially damaging, but nobody asked me, right? All of these dynamics, they're so much more important than process and practices. Yes, you have to have process and practices, but you have to base them in an environment where people will actually carry them out usefully.
I love that because it kind of sounds like you're putting people in the adult category
Yes.
for their work, which brings us very far out in the conversation. I do want to add that it is nice to read those posts when you see people talking about running better stand-ups, because first of all, it's been 25 years, but some of the developers I work with, haven't even turned 25.
Right.
So they haven't had all the time to perfect their stand-up habits, and it's always good to have thoughts about how to better those stand-ups. But I completely agree with you that it's really about the people who participate and how they show up to those meetings, and it's really kind of disheartening when you see a team that just kind of like stands up and talks about looking busy, and it's kind of obvious to everyone, but nobody says anything.
But I'll tell you what's worse. It's when everybody expects it to be that way. Everybody expects the meeting to be boring and for them to report status and to have to look busy or else, right? When everybody shares this understanding, this mindset, really, it's even sadder because they took a process that should have made things a little better and produced different outcomes, but they're not going to get different outcomes. They're going to get the same waterfall outcomes in Agile clothing.
Right, you're so right. Okay, so let's unpack all of what you have just said. Can we start with putting people first? Because I think that's it's like a very obvious, but maybe not so easy to implement kind of advice. How do you put people first in this day and age when, Elon Musk buys Twitter and immediately fires everyone? How do you tell and excuse me if my reference is not perfect. I wasn't following the news that closely. How to put people first when what the business really wants is delivery and achieving deadlines and making sure that everybody is bringing out the best within themselves.
Okay, so first, let's agree with the axiom that the business is going to want deliveries and the business is going to want product and revenue and profit and all of that. That's a given. So now the question is, well, how do we achieve that? Do we achieve that via a standardized process, which was the waterfall thinking? Do we achieve that via a free-for-all, totally, it's democratic, everybody does their own thing, total autonomy or whatever? That doesn't necessarily work out perfectly either. Or do we do something else? So this idea of putting people first, it has a couple of roots. One root is in servant leadership. That's from over 50 years ago, right? And servant leadership has played out in many industries, not just ours. And it's played out well, but it's still not terribly popular, right? So there's that. Agile brought it to the front by saying individuals' interactions over processes and tools. And a lot of people kind of missed that point. But really, when you think about it, what it says is that you need to be attentive to the system because the system is made up of individuals and their interactions. And so if we want to achieve the delivery and the product and the revenue and the profit, then we need to be attentive to what our people can do, what they will do, what they're not doing because they can't, what they're not doing because they won't. And so if we had to, just define putting people first in one sentence, it would be to start all your decision-making with consideration of the people that affect it or that are being affected by it, right? So it figures in decision-making. That's also how you would know if your organization does it or not, right? You look at, the last couple dozen decisions and you see, well, what fed into their making? Okay, was it really first the consideration of the team, management, users, buyers, etc., or was it just about, well, what does big company X do, or what is the industry standard, or what I don't know, somebody told us to do or somebody certified us in. Okay, so this goes into decision making. Now, what does it actually mean in practice? Okay, and what I'm going to describe is very much at the level of principles, not practices. So you can be doing waterfall and apply this. You can be doing agile and applying this. You can be doing your own thing and applying this. It means engaging with transparency because people need to know why decisions got made. You want to make the work and the environment motivating. You want to make boundaries clear and expansive. Now, that's important because people will have boundaries. And, senior leadership, it sets the boundaries. But sometimes it sets them in an implicit way. People don't actually know what the boundaries are until they step over them, and then they get smacked. So if people step over them accidentally, how do you treat that? How do you deal with that? But it's also good to make the boundaries expansive, to give people some, and hopefully more than some, sense of influence over what they do. Another part of putting people first is to really help people grow and to take responsibility. And when I say take responsibility, I'm referring to the model I've learned from Christopher Avery, which has to do with not just coping, but actually responding to the situation, doing the right thing, fixing, apologizing, putting it back, doing better next time. This is, you said, looking at people as adults, that's exactly it. Giving people the opportunity and encouraging them and making it possible for them to act in a responsible fashion and not just wait for their manager to fix things. Mm-hmm. So there's that. And the other thing is to simply humanize people, right? Humanize everyone. Don't call your staff resources. I mean, I have spoken about this and written about this so many times, it's probably not going to go away in my lifetime. But it's horrible. It's demeaning, and it conveys a frame of mind where, this person on my staff is equal to their potential contribution. That's really what a resource is. And so I can move them around, and I can slice and dice them, which means assign them to multiple things, and I can, utilize them more.
I don't need to talk to them about it. I will just say, from this point ongoing, you are going to be assigned to this project, and I don't care for your opinion, And I think this is a great point.
Yeah. Now, here's something else. We don't humanize management enough. And this is something I saw in the Agile space plenty. It's not something I do, but I've heard about it so many times. It's, management doesn't get it. Management does their own thing. Lots of bad things about no, but managers are people too. And there are people who have worked hard and have really great abilities and have a, pretty sizable responsibility to deal with. Another, set of people that we don't humanize enough are users. We just call them users. Right? We don't necessarily think of them as human beings who have better things to do than use our product, who may have hated our recent upgrade, who may be using our product because they don't have a choice, who have other things going on, who have fractured attention, all of those things. Right? So we want to humanize users as well. When we do that, we create an environment where people make products that deliver outcomes for other people. And that's really what it's all about in the first place, isn't it? Right? It's not vague entities, businesses, that make stuff for some other vague entity, users, just so money can flow one way. There's more than that, right? Otherwise, what good is your mission on the wall, right? What good is your brand promise?
I'm gonna move on to another element of creating a culture where delivering value is maybe in a better state of flow, which is the mindset piece. Mm-hmm. Because the word gets thrown around a lot, I think. Yeah. And I'm just really curious as to how do you put this mindset piece, like what does a leader need to think about when when thinking about achieving a desired outcome?
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, so first, let me explain what I mean by mindset, right? Because the word has become very popular after, the book on growth mindset and fixed mindset came out. And this is great work and I love it. And of course, there is a lot of talk about it in, psychological circles and whatnot. What I mean by mindset is how we make choices. And so it has these three elements. The fundamental two are what we value and what we believe. In plain English, it's what's important to us and what do we take for granted. They give rise to our operational principles, which is the set of standards by which we make decisions and take actions and otherwise choose what to do in a given situation. For example, we might believe that we don't really know what users want. Maybe we even know our users pretty well. We've humanized them. We have personas. We have even specific people in mind, but we don't quite know what they want. That gives validity to saying, well, then adaptation is important to us. We need to be adaptive. We should optimize our way of working for adaptation because we could be wrong. Okay? Now, that's a very high-level statement. What do we do about it? Well, like I said, values and beliefs give rise to principles. So one principle could be develop a bit, show it to people, decide what to do then. Another one could be work collaboratively, put more brains on the job. Another one could be don't make big promises. Promise only a little. So you don't have to change a lot then and everything that gets delayed. Okay, these are still principles, right? We will have some set of tactics, practices, roles, meetings, artifacts, tools, and such that we'll use and implement in order to get that done. So it might be, well, because we want, to collaborate and not promise a whole lot, we might just have a team that works together, thinks from week to week, and has opportunities to show their work to people who matter. So that's how we create a way of working. We start at the very top with the mindset, and then we implement it in a choice of tactics. By the way, that's already an issue that companies have because they go backwards. They copy-paste the tactics and then try to kind of make them work or graft them onto their existing choice-making, and that never ends well. So what a leader is looking for here is two words. One is to be intentional, and the other one is to be explicit about the mindset that they wish for their group to exhibit or to operate by. So for instance, I might be, a CTO or a VP Eng or a VP product or a triad of these, and I might want to have a super collaborative group that is adaptive and responsive. And I want to create, this really good, healthy people-first environment in which this takes place. Now, what I've described here, this is basically Agile thinking, but you don't have to call it that. Call it whatever you want. If this is the set of choices, then now let's work on, well, how will we bring this to life? What is, again, the set of principles that we want to have everywhere in our way of working? Could be, again, collaboration, simplicity, transparency, defer decisions to the last responsible moment, feedback all the time, short backlogs, this, and so on. And then we determine tactics from that, ideally with the team members themselves, or not if they're not ready for it, that's fine. And as time goes on, we want to make sure that what we actually do, how we actually engage and operate, is in line with what we were hoping to do. Mm-hmm. So I'll just give you an example. I had a client like this a few years ago. They needed a custom method. They were like 30, 40 people working in a bank, but they were fairly left to themselves. It was like really good technology, actually pretty forward thinking, not like what people would assume from a bank. But then they needed a custom method that would work well given their organizational context, but also the context of the product. So we followed the steps that I described, and I was there a couple of days a week to kind of coach them in it and whatnot. They called it Agile. It wasn't entirely Agile. It was a bit of a mix. But then after 6 months, I got together with all the team leads and say, okay, so now let's reverse engineer what we are actually doing and see what mindset is actually driving us. And it came out practically identical to what they started with, which was a testament to having been consistent.
But now they were maybe cognizant about it?
A lot more. And part of my service as an outsider, call me coach, consultant, troublemaker, whatever, but part of my service is to help people be aware of their choices. Because let's face it, everyone in our private lives, in our work lives, we're on autopilot most of the time. We will not be able to survive otherwise, right? There's too much coming at us and we need to decide too many things. We have to have autopilot. But when we are also trying to shift our mindset from the previous one, which for them was, standard traditional project management, to something that was a lot more flow-like with elements of Agile and Lean, but not entirely, that doesn't happen by just declaring it. It doesn't happen by flipping a switch. You kind of embrace it by doing the work according to the new method, trying to remind yourself, checking in with yourself, and reflecting frequently and adjusting as necessary. And that's hard. And sometimes you need somebody outside to kind of help you stay the course or correct it if necessary. So yes, that is the experience that we're looking for. So any leader who's thinking, well, the way we work is not optimal, then you want to think about, well, what would be optimal for us and what would it take to get there? And one thing it would take to get there is to decide what mindset would be appropriate for what we're trying to achieve here, the company mission, our objectives, our product goals, whatnot, and then kind of switch gradually. And that's really been the topic of my new book in terms of, well, how do you do that so it's not just a big bang transformation?
What you just explored really made me think about company culture and how, when it comes to culture, usually the general advice is to sit down and think about all the values that we have, or think about the things that we stand for, and then what kind of behaviors can we show for these values? What is expected of us as a team or of each individual to showcase these values and to show what
absolutely.
we do.
And actually, let me say one more thing. So when you have this mindset across time and across people, and it's consistent, that is culture. So yes, those are different terms because culture is more permanent and it's slower to change. But you could, and people do, have different mindsets when they do different things. For instance, and by the way, this goes back even 30 and 40 years. You had traditional project management very much with the mindset of predictability, making promises on time and on budget. But then you had project rescue as well. Projects that totally ran over, late, expensive, this and that. And you would bring somebody in to kind of rescue the project. And when you look at what people did for rescue, that was very much an Agile mindset, right? It's still a project, which is fine. You can have that. But the way they managed things was very different from the big predictability and all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it is legitimate, in your value delivery system to have a certain mindset on what you do for this year and the next, and maybe the one after that. Maybe you have acquired a new company and you need to integrate it, and now you need to adapt things. And so you don't need to reinvent things. You're not starting a transformation from scratch, but you do want to be intentional and explicit about how do we want to be moving forward.
With moving on, these are all really good practices, and you have written a few books about all these practices. And going back to my initial question, we have somebody who sees that there is some kind of an agile storm in the software development part of the company and wants to fix it. Our first kind of advice is to look at the entire system, not just your software developers. Go out there and look at the designers, look at the business, maybe even look at sales, because that's also part of all the deadlines that we adhere to. And then look at your people as individuals and look at your processes holistically. Also think about your values and what you deliver and how your employees are engaged. And then what?
Okay. So what I started doing a couple of years ago is look at, well, how do you get to a really good target state? Not some ideal target state that a consultancy decided for you, but what would be ideal for you? So what I think there is that it makes sense to improve the fitness for purpose of our system, not just to plug holes, not just to fix immediate problems. And so I came up with this model of, well, you want to get to this target state where your value delivery is, well fit for the purpose that the company needs from it. Here's a set of strategies. There's only 10 of them. They're incremental, they're sequential. You want to do a couple at a time, and then you kind of level up through fitness. So in an analogy, it's like trying to become more healthy, right? So it's not like, well, I want to run 5K, but I'm not a runner, so I need to, get out and start running. That would be akin to fixing a problem. But maybe I don't run 5K because I think it's stupid. Well, personally, I don't. I love running, but just as an example, right? I know many people who will not run unless they're running away from something, okay? But maybe somebody told me that it's good for me, so I should do this. But there's something else going on here. There's something systemic about myself as a person, how I eat, how I sleep. Maybe I'm overweight, I don't know, something like that. And also how I think that I need to work on if I'm going to be running 5K sustainably, right? Maybe every week and, not feeling like I'm dead when I finish it. So the strategies are very much about how do you make your overall system healthier and healthier, more and more fit for purpose. And so what they give leaders is basically a manageable sequence of things to do instead of saying, well, we need to transform. Mm-hmm. It is a more palatable and sustainable way to create that transformation over time. So the first thing we need to understand is what is the current level of fitness for purpose. So I've developed this super simple tool. It doesn't require surveys. It doesn't require metrics. It doesn't require big consultancies. You understand this. You do this. You understand your current fitness. Then you look at, okay, so like we're level 2. What do we do now? And there's a couple of things. There are high-level strategies. Again, you can instantiate them with Agile or Lean or whatever makes sense to you. And you do them just enough, and then you get to level 3, and then you do another few, and then you get to level 4, and so on. And I think this is actually pretty unusual in our industry because our industry is very much used to prescription. Here's the ideal, here's the best practice, here's what big player X does. Just copy that. And I don't think we're seeing the results. And I think what we are seeing is a lot of overwhelmed leaders who are saying, well, 2024, so much advice, so many good ideas. Some of them don't agree with each other. What should I do? And it matters because maybe I'm a 9-person startup, or maybe I'm a 50-person scale-up, or maybe I'm in the healthcare space as opposed to, I don't know, just web applications. It matters.
Without giving away the book that you're referring to that you've written, how should a team or a company start with fitness for purpose? Can you give us a little more insights?
Right. So the first thing is we need this. I know this is from change management literature. We need a group of leaders, a coalition of leaders, several people, not just one, who are going to dedicate some of their attention to making sure that we improve things. Okay, that can be a head of product with an engineering lead, with a design lead, or maybe a program manager, maybe your local coach, who knows, okay? But basically enough people from across the value delivery system who are saying, we're going to look after improvement. We may not necessarily be doing all the work. We're going to rely on a whole lot of people in the field, let's call them advocates or ambassadors, but we're going to make sure that improvement has a home. Mm-hmm. It's not just something that's a line item on some executive's role description or yearly goals or OKRs or something like that. It is something that we are explicitly doing. Once you do that, you do your current state assessment. It takes 10 minutes when you do it on your own. I suggest that people do it together because that shows two things. One, it shows if they're aligned or not. And the conversation reveals differences in understanding of what will make us successful. So have the conversation about that. Now, they need to say, well, okay, we are, let's say, at level 3. The way these strategies work, they're incremental, which means that there should have been 2 from level 1 and 2 from level 2 that you would have done before. And chances are, every listener we have whose system is at level 3, they've done some of them. One is not to overwhelm the teams. That's an English name for the fancy one of portfolio management. Another one is, are we organized suitably for the mission? That's designing the way of working. A level 2 strategy is, do all decisions have a home? Mm-hmm. As opposed to we occasionally just don't decide things, or we overturn decisions because we never quite figured out who would be making them and how. And the fourth one, that's also from level 2, is our system even stable? Can we even have some realistic expectations that when we feed requirements and projects and initiatives and epics into it, we can kind of know when and in what shape they'll come out? Is it stable from that standpoint? If you look at any of these 4 and you're saying, you know what, we're not quite there. We kind of do something, but we're not quite there. Maybe our team structure is kind of iffy. Maybe our process is too rigid for our purposes. That's my typical client. Maybe not all decisions, in fact, have a home. And so, for instance, when we do release planning, we know who sets the date, but midway through release planning and we need to change the date, it's anybody's game. And we're not good about it. So you fix those. Mm-hmm. You plug those holes in the implementation of the strategies. The book also says, how much is enough for each one? Like, how would you know that you've done them enough so that you can, in fact, level up? And then you turn your attention to the level 3 strategies. One of them, for instance, is to increase safety, teamwork, and collaboration. Again, with some criteria of how you would know that you have enough of it for that you actually have teams and not just work groups that are being called teams or pods or squads. Another one is to be deferring commitments and shortening some of your release cycles. And the third one is to have teams actually contribute to planning, which you might have already, but maybe they're not contributing meaningfully enough. So all of these are, again, they're sequential, they're incremental, they're qualitative, and like you would know when you have enough to kind of level up and do the ones from the higher levels. Mm-hmm. And what I love about this model, and I mean, I wanted to produce something that all leaders in development could use, even if what they have is homegrown, even if what they have is off the shelf, if it's scaled or not, whatever. And it actually turned out this way. So I'm really excited that there's this sequence of 10 things, 10 changes you can do to how people work that actually work. But how it will turn out will be specific to you, mm-hmm. not to something that got copy-pasted.
So it is actually a mix of coaching and consulting. I'm really fascinated. What came to my mind is actually like a thought on the side of all of what you have just described. Could we could we say that this focus group, which you didn't call it a focus group, I'm just making this name up, of leaders or of people who are responsible for making the changes, or like a pilot of what all the other teams should look like? Because it sounded like when you start with maybe a head of product and an engineering lead and maybe someone from design or whatever, just a team of people who will think about how the organization should work better, should come together and behave like adults and look at all these steps to improvement and all these things that you need to understand better to see how they can be improved. Should they look like a pilot team to the rest of the organization when they work together on this implementation, or we can call it transformation if we want, of value delivery?
I don't know if I think of it as a pilot. I think that we have people who, again, are turning some of their attention toward improvement. I just call them improvement leaders. It's specific, but it's not, two in one camp, right? They are not in the business of telling everybody how it's going to be. They're in the business of making sure that the organization gets better. Now, they might rely on, again, a lot of internal expertise. They might get some external expertise. To the extent that we want to be people first, they engage others. They engage others in coming up with ideas and what to do and so on. So, for instance, one of the strategies in level 1 is, again, to design the way of working based on what's appropriate for the mission and the objectives. That usually does involve a whole lot of people. Now, it's not something that you do once and for all and it's all perfect. Like I said before, it might change later, but those people say, well, we should change it now because it's gotten stale or things have changed. Even the makeup of this team can change over time. If more people want to come in and others want to leave, that's happened with several of my clients. This change team, the first people to come in are usually the really excited ones who like, we need change now because things cannot go on like this. But what happened in some cases is that they were not actually all that effective at making change. They really wanted it to happen and they were glad to help, but they weren't leading as much. So the composition changes. Now, I can think back to a client, there were like 250 people in product development, and we had a team of 6. None of them was VP and up. The most senior there was the director of engineering, but they had the blessing of the VP engineering, of the head of product, of the CTO, who never showed up to those meetings. They had weekly meetings. Those executives never showed up, but they did talk, one-on-one and outside the room and whatnot. That worked super well. So this team of improvement leaders, it needs the blessing of the organization to say, we allow you, we want you, we encourage you, we support you in making sure that things do in fact get better. Otherwise, what happens? It probably ends up being the responsibility of an executive who has tons to do, right? Doesn't have enough time to deal with this, has to delegate it anyway. May not even have enough time to pay attention to like all the workings of the system. And sometimes maybe under the pressures of their own, chain of command. So this team of improvement leaders, that's why it's so important that we compose it from people from like everywhere in the system, not just engineers, not just Scrum Masters. Yeah.
Right. So perhaps in the beginning there is engagement from the so-called early adopters who are more likely to be comfortable with change and who are people who are maybe excited about the change. And then as time goes on and perhaps there is some improvement showing, there will be other people who will come in and engage in creating those changes.
Yeah, Totally normal. Happened with most of my clients. In fact, in one of them, the way we formed the first team, it was through self-selection. So I facilitated self-selection, and a bunch of people showed up because they wanted to be either candidates or they wanted to affect the choice. And one of the choices we made in that self-selection meeting was at what frequency would membership be up for reconsideration? And I think they said 3 or 6 months. That's for a company of 120, 60 of whom were in prod dev. And that's what they did. And what I heard, I mean, I wasn't with them long. I was just a few days with them. Like the following year, only one person from the original contingent had stayed on and everybody else was new. It's fine.
So it's be comfortable with moving on when the time is right also.
Yeah, the important thing is that their mission remains clear, crisp, understood, supported, enabled, and that they continue to have the support from executives.
Mm-hmm.
Because all of this improvement, and that's another important thing about fitness. Fitness doesn't stay constant, right? So you can improve things now, but then maybe a few people leave, and because it's a system, some things unravel. Or maybe the product has not been successful and now we are, kind of frantically trying to do some things and so on. So our fitness will fluctuate over time. All of this improvement, it's not a one and done. So you need to keep it, to keep giving it attention. And, what Agile tried to do is, we do team retrospectives, but that's not good enough because it's usually only team level. Back when I started coaching Agile 20 years ago, we did project retrospectives and release retrospectives, which brought in everybody. Let me tell you, that practice did not catch on because people are saying, well, we don't have enough time. We need to keep coding. Well, you keep coding and you keep following the way of working that may not be optimal for what you need. So you do need some sort of, system level attention because things change.
Right, for sure. So that was actually gonna be my next point. We have created a group within the organization with enough leverage to actually make changes, and you give those people opportunity to make changes, and there is actual tangible change within the organization. And we keep on iterating. How is your recipe for improvement? What do you suggest after the team and the organization or the value chain has gone through maybe a couple iterations of this? How often should they look back at their delivery system?
Well, I would say that depends on how fast your business moves, how fast things change in your business, and also how big it is, right? So if you have a product development organization of a few hundred people, yes, you will work in teams, of course, and some teams will work together on, maybe sub areas of the product and whatnot. But the strategies that I describe, they take their time to kind of act through the system and change dynamics and whatnot. So maybe reflecting every few months makes sense. Okay, but if you have a 9-person startup, I just spoke with one the other day, then you can be reflecting every 3 weeks, right? Because if you want to change something, you just get everybody together and you talk about it, and you kind of put it through its paces for a little bit, and you see how it played out, and then you decide. In which case, it's probably no different from a team retrospective. Fine, but the important thing is that you actually review this across the system. Our industry is so big. I mean, not intentionally, but that's how it acts. It's so big on local optimization. One person does something in engineering, another person does design thinking here, and then there is, daily deployment here and whatever, but the things don't necessarily work together to produce the desired effect. So we need to get past that.
Let's say that we believe you. Could you give us maybe an example or I know you have mentioned a couple of your clients, but maybe a story of how this all came together, or how we should imagine it working in real life.
Okay. So do you want me to focus more on people first, or on mindset, or on the strategies, or?
I think the strategies. I think it would be cool to see.
Okay. So I'm thinking of a client I had throughout 2022. And when I say throughout, I'm not with them every day. So like the whole thing was like a total of 10 days worth of effort. And they started, well, when I met them, they had been trying to use Scrum. They had brought it in 8 months prior, and it was not understood at all. And it was very messy. They had 5 development teams and a content team, visual content. And it was a mess, total mess. So there was this team of improvement leaders, which in this case was basically just the managers and a couple of team leads. And we worked together on, first off, making sure that the way of working was right. So there was a bit of change to it. They did keep Scrum. I showed them how to think of it the way Scrum intended, but they redrew the team lines. So they moved people around, they moved responsibilities so that teams were able to make progress and not just constantly wait for each other. We plugged the holes. So that was level 1. Then we plugged the holes in decision making. Too many of the decisions were being made by the founder. Pretty much everybody else thought, we can't tell him to stop that. I did, because I'm an outsider. I can say stuff like that. He said, oh, yeah, sure, I get it, fine. And he then just stopped telling people what to do, literally. It was that easy. Because he just didn't know how the method was supposed to work, but he learned. So we did that. We worked on stabilizing the system so that there's lots of ideas from Agile and Kanban there. Basically, don't take too much work in, kind of limit some WIP. Team works together, not as a group of individuals and so on. I did try, because for many years as a coach, I had tried to also work on, safety and collaboration and teamwork. But those are level 3 strategies. So I can tell you, even though I tried to help the teams with those while they were at level 2, they didn't quite stick. The safety wasn't entirely there. The teamwork, slightly getting there, but not really all that great. But once everything got stable and, we were like 4 months in, and people saw that this is for real. And when management says that, when they say something about something, they mean it and they stand behind it, and they're not going to just change their minds later frivolously, which is what people originally thought. So then we worked on teamwork. They had this big offsite and I facilitated it. And one of the purposes there was to help create more collaboration and teamwork. And it worked beautifully. We did open space, so that really, really helped. And then we kept going through them. Now, I can tell you something that demonstrated how far they'd gone. So I started with them in January. Around August, they had a new project. The project they called New UI because their old UI was just cumbersome. Its design principles were, let's put it this way, not great UX. Okay, the UI worked, right? But it wasn't great UX, and people complained. So they said, okay, we're going to do the new UI. Now, they were going to do the whole design and the whole programming and the whole testing like waterfall because that's what the designers were used to. And the designers were genuinely worried that if they didn't do that, then management would be, upset with them. So management worked really hard to say, no, we're going to put together a task force. So 2 designers, a bunch of developers, a bunch of testers. They took them from the Scrum teams. And what they ended up doing is like practically textbook Agile development for UI replacement. Which, let me tell you, I rarely see done. Even when people understand it, it freaks them out. So they did, in fact, build the UI gradually. They tested it along the way. They changed things along the way. They did do too much design up front, but then they quickly learned the lesson. That was wonderful. So when I left them, again, it took a year. They were at level 4. And totally self-sufficient and whatnot. And it was lovely because it really didn't take much effort. I just did a little bit of guiding and reflecting and coaching, but management did it all. And once really the team members and the team leads got to trust everybody else, it was like, the dam broke open.
I will share a few things that really stuck with me. First is really when you mentioned boundaries, that also like is thrown around a lot, and that goes hand in hand for me with treating people as adults. Putting people first doesn't mean like waiting for everyone to show up at the meeting and not starting before everyone showed up, but really creating some boundaries around what we allow and what we don't allow, and then having consequences of actions. And when we talk about what our values are, then really seeing how those values show up in our everyday work, and making sure that our decisions are based on those values.
Can I give you an example?
Yeah, go ahead.
This reminds me of a meeting that I facilitated for a client, must have been 5 years ago. So this was a very forward-thinking product engineering organization inside a very traditional media organization. And at some point, they needed to get together with the infrastructure people who did all the provisioning and the systems and the computing power and whatnot. This was kind of pre-cloud for them. And they were supposed to put together a 5-year plan. Now, the group I was with was already fairly agile. The infrastructure people hadn't been involved much, although they should have been. The director of the group, when he opened the meeting, he said this. He said, I don't know that we can look 5 years down. Okay? Feel free to make the 5 years vague, make the near future less vague. Okay? This is yours to decide. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I do need you to stick to our overall strategy. And, you kind of know what our budget limitations are and whatnot. And I want you working together. This is yours. I'm leaving. Take it from here. Those are boundaries made explicit with values.
I love it. Thank you for that story. And also what really stuck with me is, which I love, and I aim to do this at every company that I interact with, involve the stakeholders. And the stakeholders are not just from the technology team. The IT in a lot of product companies is where all the forward thinking happens, and the developers are the people who will tell you, this is possible, or technology is simply not available to do this. But it's not only software developers who should be responsible for the delivery of a certain product. As we are approaching the end of our time here, is there anything else that you would like to add to our conversation today?
I think we touched on the important things, right? I don't want to prescribe to people what to do. I don't want to pretend, if you do X, you will succeed. So the strategies I describe are basically types of changes to make. None of them will actually surprise people when they read them. Mm-hmm. But the big deal is, you do them throughout the system, and you kind of instantiate them for your specific situation and needs. And when I say situation, it's, the people you have, the technology, your legacy code, your tech debt, your business pipeline, is it public or private? All of those things, okay? The other important point is go at it sequentially and incrementally. Don't just go big bang. That's just palatable and simply more realistic. And that this is in fact suitable for companies of any size. So mid-size, startups, big companies will have several systems. You do this to each. That's really all it takes. Can I give something to our listeners?
Sure, go ahead.
All right. Something I want to give our listeners, because they've heard so much about this model, is chapter 1 of the book. Mm-hmm. It's not an introduction. It's not just, the first chapter, so, teaser. It's not. I call it the big picture because it actually pulls double duty. It's both the foundation for the rest of the book, but it also covers all the key points of the model. And I wrote it this way because I imagine readers are super busy, not going to read the whole book. But if they do have 20 minutes, that can be enough for them to, put some change in motion. Mm-hmm. So you can download chapter 1. The URL, I think we'll put it in the show notes, but
sure.
I wrote it in English. So it's like heard on podcast. .deliverbetterresultsbook.com, and you'll get to chapter 1. You can, show it to your colleagues, so you can kind of build the same mental model, and also have a bit of a written record of this conversation.
I love it. Thank you very much. And
pleasure.
I am sure the listeners of the Level Up Engineering podcast will appreciate the opportunity, and I will definitely check it out myself if I can say so. One more thing that really stuck with me, and I think it's worth mentioning, is that what we just spent an hour or so talking about is not a destination where a team is going to arrive. Yeah. It's a constant sort of work, like fitness, and this is a product going to be the best version of what it could be. Working together always will have some friction and some questions, and the new people come and they are not used to each other and all that stuff. So I think our listeners should take away that this is an iterative process, and everybody involved in working together needs to always look out for places where the work that we do together can be improved.
Absolutely. I mean, even if the people did not change over, the product evolves, the business evolves, the economy evolves, geopolitics evolve. Everything happens around us when we need to respond, right? And managers will respond no matter what, when they're intentional and explicit, and they have an idea of, again, the mission and the objectives, they can respond effectively.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Please tell us where our listeners can follow your work.
I post every week on LinkedIn. So just look for Gil Broza. There's only one. I post every week. In fact, a lot of the content that I post there ends up in my books. The new book is number 4. That's how a lot of my books came to be. They're not a collection of blog posts. They're totally books. But that's where the thinking started. There's also my website, which is 3pvantage.com. It's my own company. And those are the 2 main things. And I would welcome anybody who wants to connect with me on LinkedIn. Please do that and just say where you heard me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you for coming on the show. Dearest Level Up Engineering podcast listeners and watchers, I am really happy that you could stay here with us today. It is my pleasure to thank Gil Broza, who spent an hour with us talking about his newest book and giving us some insight into how product development can be better and should be better. I am so happy that you could join us for today, and thank you for all your advice.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I am Karolina Tóth, and I hope to see you next time.
Thanks for staying with us. This was the Level Up Engineering Podcast by Apex Lab. Check them out at apexlab.io. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel, rate our content, and share your thoughts on this episode. See you next time.